Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's educational webinar hosted by International Trade Council. My name is Ron Nolasco, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's session. Before we start our discussion, let's take some quick housekeeping matters. Please, can everyone hear me clearly? If you can, type yes in the chat box. All right, I can see here. Okay, thank you, Gloria. Thank you, lady. So again, excellent. Thank you for confirming. So let's ensure that everyone can see the. Well, I will going to project the present station slide in a minute. So it seems that everything is running smoothly. And just a quick reminder to our attendees: if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type in your question in the Q&A box located in our chat. Located in your webinar interface. We'll address the question as many as possible during the Q&A session and following the presentation. So our topic for today is non-tariff barriers to trade. And today we will delve deep into the complexities of technical and political regulations, examine the impact of sanitary measures, and explore the intricacies of customs procedure and intellectual property rights. Our goal is to equip you with the knowledge needed to navigate these barriers effectively, ensuring smoother international trade operations for your business. So please join me in welcoming our speaker, Linda Middleton Jones, Managing Director of International Trade Matters Limited. So before the speaker starts the presentation, I will just share the presentation right now. 1 second. All right, go ahead, Linda. If you can see the screen, you can start.
I can. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this seminar. I think that this is the most important thing that anybody can know about international trade. Well, that is apart from Incoterms, but that's another topic. I'm going to talk, as Ron said, about non-tariff barriers today, but I'd like to give it a subtitle. And that subtitle would be to improve your competitive advantage. So knowledge of non-tariff barriers will give you a competitive edge over your competitors and increase your opportunities. So that's what we're going to be looking at today. So Ron, can you move to the next slide, please? For those of you who know me, hi, good to see you, or for us to be in contact again. But for most of you, I guess you don't. So I believe that I'm an advocate and ambassador for international trade. You'll see here that I'm a founder and managing director of International Trade Matters. I'm a co-founder and director of the Society for Independent International Trade and Customs Experts. I work for the UK government in innovation with tech startups, and I'm a moderator for the Institute of Export, amongst other things, but those are the things that relate to us today. What I would like to say at the start of this presentation is that this presentation is covered by copyright law. All the rights are reserved, and the presentation, its contents are protected by those laws. Unauthorized use or reproduction of any part of this presentation without prior written permission is strictly prohibited. Thank you very much for your understanding on that. So, Ron, could you move on to the next slide, please? So a non-tariff barrier is a trade restriction. And I will leave you to read most of the slides because I don't believe in just producing a presentation that I will read to you. But when we're looking at this, I want you to note some figures from the WTO. In 2021, there were 18,569 measures, non-tariff barriers initiated. And of those 18,000, 3,500 measures were put in force for phytosanitary measures. That is astounding. Also that year, there were 29,000 measures, of which 34,000 measures were for technical barriers to trade. But this is not the whole story. So let us move on to the next slide, please, Ron. So I think that non-tariff barriers, which I think are the sexy part of international trade, really, have two perspectives. We have the regulatory and legal control side of things, and we're going to talk about biases, whether they be cultural or whatever reason, to add knowledge for you when you're trading with overseas countries. So next slide, please, Ron. So the first part of this presentation is about regulatory and legal controls. And I think it's really, really difficult to separate politics and economics. So we have geoeconomics, geopolitics, and those sorts of things. And I'm sure from your own trading relationships with your customers, with your central or local governments, you will find that the two overlap. Please move on, Ron. I do apologise to everybody. There seems to be a glitch in me presenting these slides, so Ron is helping out. So thank you, Ron. So let's look at these economic measures. And generally, they're couched around our climate, socioeconomics, geoeconomics, and terrorism at this moment in time. So this is a generalization. It's not exclusive, but you get the idea. On, next one. And here is something that I think is quite interesting in how I've separated out this global hierarchy. So we have China, Russia, US, UK, the rest of the world within this geoeconomic and socioeconomic field. And we've got these regional alliances, and these are really, really interesting about who is in bed with who, so to speak. I'm particularly interested in the BRICS companies or countries that are coming together, and their aim actually is to promote world peace. That's great. That's great. Let's hope that happens. We have the EU. We have free trade agreements going on. We have bilateral, plurilateral, multilateral agreements, many of which are conducted with the World Trade Organization in Geneva, overseeing those things. And then we have this other layer, which is the national priorities, which you can see here: economic, health, welfare, natural disasters, and my gosh, there's an awful lot of that, migration, climate change, net zero. So there are layers of complexity in our global trading environment. Ron? Within those environments, we have a number of prohibitions and restrictions. And we see here the primary themes, which are built on what I've just said. So the protection of the environment, health, humans, plants, protection of national treasures. That's quite an interesting one. And industrial property. That stops you taking things of a heritage to a country out of the country. Industrial property, well, we see a lot of that in Financial Times. And of this last one, the protection of public morality, which would change whichever country you're in, public policy and non-nuclear proliferation. And the WTO has a watching brief and an instructive and perhaps a negotiating role to play in all of these. Ron. So I've separated out these restrictive measures into three different areas, really. And if you think about, they could be total, in the case of sanitary, phytosanitary, etc., rules of origin, total controls. There could be necessary controls, and I'll put that in the centre one, exchange rate devaluation, perhaps, competition law, technical sanctions or whatever. And then we've got the quantitative measures. So we've got the subsidies, the anti-dumping, quotas, embargoes, all of those sorts of things. And then we've got, over the top of that, we've got license acquisitions. So we've got standard license, we've got specific open licenses, and general open licenses. Now, that might change in all different countries, but that's sort of like the general standard of what these restrictive measures cover and attempt to stop trade rather than allow trade. And on that point, Ron, we need to consider here how globalization, which was the aim after the Second World War, which was about free trade, globalization, access to markets for everybody, against the era of protectionism. And some countries are worse or better at that than others. And you can see that actually, globalization, well, they put in place tariffs, generalized system of preferences, free trade agreements. We've got these trade groupings that I've alluded to before. We've got special friends, although I'm not quite sure whether that's actually true, but a lot of people believe the myth that the UK and US are special friends. And then against that, we've got these barriers, the technical ones, the phytosanitary. We've got sanctions, quotas, origin, rules of origin, and of course, cultural differences or biases that come into play. Government revenue gets the money in the form of taxes or duties from this. What happens with protectionism is that you have an increased cost of imported goods. And it's simple for them to do that. The other thing about these barriers is they can be imposed by both the exporting country as well as the importing country. So that's something to bear in mind. Ron? I just sort of thought about this globalization against protectionism, and it sort of feels like equal forces against each other. So equal opposite, there's equal opposite reaction to each of these. So going back to the World Trade Organization, they're really working hard to remove non-tariff barriers, but they are continuing to emerge as the numbers I gave you at the start of this. And actually, ask yourself the question, is a complete free trade globe unrealistic in the complexity of our world today? And I think it probably is. There is an argument that we could say we need freer trade through the reduction of those barriers, something the WTO is working on, and promotion of transparency and fair competition. And I think that's a worthy goal for us to aspire to. And I think that fair competition is more about ethics and about morality and about can we help the less developed countries to be part of a global trading. How do the actions of one country impinge on another? Is it all about that protectionism without a care for another country? So I thought I'd be a bit clever and ask TA, could I have an equation that shows these two equal forces? Ron, can you put that up, please? So there you are. For those of you who are interested in such things, this is about total trade flow against tariff rates and minus the non-tariff barriers. It's not nonsense, but it's just for those that appreciate that sort of thing. So Ron, so where did all of these things start? Could you, next slide please, Ron? The starting place, wow. The very first attempt of economic sanctions was actually undertaken by the League of Nations. Woodrow Wilson, I think, started the League of Nations. And it imposed the ban on coal and oil imports by the Mussolini regime, hence the pictures of Mr. Mussolini there. It was actually a major failure because Italy simply left the League of Nations and signed direct bilateral agreements with England and France. So it didn't actually succeed, but that was where we started. Ron, just a couple of things here. So, sanctions are more effective when used against a democracy than against an autocracy. And there is a very famous man, Hofbauer, said, "It is difficult to bully a bully." I shall leave that with you. It covers embargoes for all or part of trade, and both sanctions and embargoes can be used to avoid military force. So actually, it can be a deterrent. And these sanctions can be used in times of war under emergency powers, or they can be part of the economic strategy or industrial strategy of a country. So, what sort of things are regulated? And I've alluded to this earlier on. Could you show the next slide, please, Ron? This is quite a useful thing, and it's issued by the National Audit Office of the UK, and it gives the whole flow of what is regulated and why, as it clearly said, and it covers public services, capital infrastructure, businesses, economy, employers. So I think that was a very good example of the spread of those regulations. So we have the system. We understand that non-tariff barriers on the political economic sense are actually a barrier to free trade. We understand that the two are in equal forces to each other, that actually they are a movable feast, the negative effects of these non-tariff barriers, and they can be all sorts of different things, from the Spanish people making the British tourists from Gibraltar wait a long time. It can be things to do. I'll give an example a bit later on of that. But let's have a look at this next slide that gives some of the intended or otherwise negative effects that you may come along. So let's deal with each of these in turn. Governments do not generate extra income from imported goods. That could be a deterrent to actually putting in these sanctions. But if you think about Russia at this moment in time, they're not generating extra income from extra goods, from either they're exported and the sanctions have reduced their imports. Number two, free markets are distorted. Well, we all, I'm sure, are aware of the trade wars between the US and China. Free markets distorted. And that very much depends on the characters of the people who are in leadership in these countries. Number three, the benefits of comparative advantages are reduced. Well, we can see that again in Russia. Regulatory processes increase administrative costs. Well, the prime example of this was Brexit. And when the UK left the EU, our regulatory processes increased exponentially. It's been a challenging time for British businesses. Number five, producers have a reduced opportunity to sell when quotas are in place. Well, if we think about the fact that the UK is talking about a free trade agreement with Australia, we have an issue that's waiting to occur over the production and price of lamb. So it so happens that the price of lamb, the production and the delivery of Australian lamb to the UK is still cheaper than that of the British farmer. It'd be interesting to see how that affects British farming of lamb products. Number 6, devaluation policies in markets make domestic goods less competitive. I think there is a good example for that with what China is doing. Number 7, and by the way, anybody can disagree with me. I'm quite happy to see things in the chat that disagree, or if you want to add anything. Number 7, supply is reduced against demand, increasing prices in markets. If we think about the debacle of the what's it called, the PPE equipment that the UK imported from Turkey during the COVID epidemic, we had problems. Oh, I didn't want to go there yet. Thank you, Ron. Number 8, we're talking about they can lead to trade wars. Already mentioned US and China, and then human rights overlooked or ignored. Now, human rights again is subjective to the leadership and to the parties in different countries. I have written China. It could well be Russia. It could well be any other country. So please do not think that I am pointing a finger at anybody in this talk. So, next slide, please, Ron. Corporate consensus on non-tariff barriers. Well, we have all of these have been told to me as a company. You know, it's creating obstacles or different standards, lack of transparency, burdensome, and exactly. And some of them are easy. CE marking, for instance, is a step-by-step process. Self-certification, fairly easy. But something that's coming through right now from the EU is the CBAM. And underneath this new regulation, we've got to have a carbon footprint calculation. We've got to do carbon offsetting, carbon neutral certification, and reduce future emissions. And there's a whole shed load of stuff that's going to come over the hill for companies who want to trade within the EU. Now, that's going to cause or impact so many different companies, which is good for the International Trade Council. It's good for my own company in helping people through that. But knowing about it helps you to prepare for it. It is when these things appear that you don't have notice of that it creates a danger, and again you lose that competitive advantage. So always try to be aware of what is happening in your trade, with your trade association, within your sector, within your industry, and look for help before you need it, so that at least you can ask the right questions, which shows that your customers understand that you are interested in how your goods and their requests are about to be met. Really, really important. Next slide, please, Ron. And in the news right now, some of you may recognize all of these. There's talk about critical minerals, around lithium, around cobalt, around nickel. Who's got them? Who can have them? Who can share them? We've got the challenges with iron and steel, and the original mining of those products. We've got the Kimberley diamonds or blood diamonds legislation that we have to be aware of. And you can see all of the other things. We've got mining on the moon has been in the news. And just some little nonsense here. The EU has banned its exports of caviar to Russia. That's interesting. And then Russian cats are banned from competitions set by the International Cat Federation, which is also interesting. Both happen to be on Russia. I'm not picking on Russia. I actually quite like the Russians. I've got some wonderful Russian friends. I'm just giving you some of the facts. So that covers the quotas, the sanctions, the embargoes, the things that are in the news, the things that companies have to be aware of if they want to be competitive and and really showing their customers, their stakeholders, their investors, whoever it is, that they are equipped for trading in 2024 and beyond, because they have the knowledge, they are aware that there are barriers, but they are taking redress and being aware of that, which is always a good thing. But I'd like to move on to that other circle that I started at the start. Could we go on to cultural bias, please? Ron, next slide, please. I just want to think about you personally. I haven't met most of you, but how do you perceive different nations and how people respond to you? Now, I am particularly well travelled. I'm blessed that I've been to lots and lots of countries and I've met lovely people, and I've always found a smile works, always. And whatever people's perceptions, or you're not going there, are you, or whatever, they've been mostly misleading. And I think that you go to different countries and you are open and you are respectful of cultures, it can really help. So next slide, please. And through this, we could have, through our own education, our own lifestyle, there could be cultural incompatibilities. And we see this in the news, and it's very sad. And I think it's probably a minority, but it is difficult. And knowing that your culture is so different from another culture that you want to have as a customer means that you need to do your market research. You need to understand what it is that country responds to. And for instance, if we think about team appreciation, it's appreciated in the US, Singapore, but in Russia and Greece, it's actually individual appreciation. So it'd be the person instead of the company. There are things called uncertainty avoidance. So whereas a framework, a rule set around a contract would be needed in Brazil and Switzerland, actually less so in Hong Kong. Some countries like people to be assertive, where they're appreciated in the US, Austria, whereas in New Zealand, actually, it's a harmonious decision-making. Power sharing, absolutely no way in Thailand or Brazil. But in Australia, it's all about cooperative interaction. So understanding these incompatibilities really would help on top of all of the geopolitical and economic stuff that we've just talked about. And I would say that translation isn't enough. You do not just translate your marketing material. And I'll give you an example. So in the UK, and perhaps other countries, I don't know, if something is really expensive, really expensive, and we were telling somebody about it, we would say, it cost me an arm and a leg. That's what we say. Now, if you translated that into Spanish, for instance, they wouldn't know what we were talking about because it doesn't make any sense. It cost me an arm and a leg. What's that mean? They say, and this is in its English version, it cost the eye out of my face. Now, you can imagine if you're doing a marketing campaign and you get those sorts of things wrong, it just doesn't work. And there was a British car that was being sold in Spain, and it was called the Nova car, which is a word we use in the UK. In Spain, it's two words, and it's pronounced Nova. and it means doesn't go. You can probably guess how many how many of those cars were sold in Spain. It didn't last, sadly. Then we have the barriers of gender, and we still see that in some communities where women are disregarded or overlooked or ignored. Um, I'm sure you know which countries I'm talking about there. We have those communication styles, and I've referred to some of them. How do you talk to them? I was given an example some years ago that if you're going to a meeting in America and you're asked to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning, you are expected to be early. If you have the same in Spain, well, you're probably okay for be an hour or two, even 2 hours late. You have to be credible, because when you go to another country, you have to be visible, but it's very easy to lose your credibility. And once you've lost that, you probably pack up and go home. You should not be selling or offering to sell more than you can deliver. It's very, very easy to lose your credibility. So have that as part of your strategy of knowing what your non-tariff barriers are. How much can I deliver? What can I promise and what can I deliver, so that I always have credibility in the eyes of my customers, my potential customers, etc., etc. Last one on this. This picture is very important to me. I had a dear friend who used to sell carpet tiles in the Middle East, and this picture reminds me of the experience he had. So he was forced out of his car at a checkpoint in the Middle East, and the customs people threw all his samples on the floor and then ordered him to drive away without giving him access into the country. What had happened is somebody in their wisdom, in the country of origin, I think it could have been the UK, I'm not sure, had named the carpet tiles whiskey, brandy, port, sherry, etc. So although there was no alcohol involved, they'd used the names that were perhaps an anathema to the country involved in the Middle East. So these are barriers you can avoid just by doing your market research and being a bit sensible about things. And of course, we've got ethics as well. And there is a business tool called Pastel that's been updated to Steeple now, and the extra E is about ethics. Do you want to be working with that country? Do you want to be working with that person? Next slide, please. Okay, so these are some additional barriers, and I've started talking about it in as much as you need to do your market research. But equally, we need to look at ourselves and how we present ourselves in other countries. This, again, is a non-tariff barrier if we don't take cognizance of how we present ourselves. And egos can be a bad thing. Well, I know everything and I can speak louder than you and faster than you and whatever it is. So ego can be a disadvantage. Leadership, definitely. Leadership in the international trade, a special thing. I'll talk about that just now in a minute. And intelligence. Where do you get your intelligence from? Is it right? Or did you meet somebody in the pub last night who's told you everything you ever needed to know about Bulgaria, for instance? And there are lots of companies who can help with this sort of thing. So there's a company called Swiftsure that deals with getting a new employee in the US, for instance. There's a company called Export Angels that do a really, really, really good service of market intelligence. So, and within all of this is communications. You might have an agent or a distributor in another country. If you're not communicating with them and you're not monitoring and you're not giving them targets, actually you're doing yourself a disservice, a costly disservice. And the last thing on this is, if you don't get your legals right, you don't get your protection, whether that be IP, as Ron mentioned at the start, then actually you're up against that problem as well. And one of those is the right of first registration that the People's Republic of China have So if you're planning to go into the Chinese market, make sure that you conduct the first registration before a Chinese company does. On that leadership then, can you go on to the next slide, please, Ron? This is very much about how we used to have a leadership style based on Batman and Robin. Now, please don't laugh about that. But it used to be somebody making all the decisions and people following him. We can't do that in today's volatile and uncertain, chaotic, ambiguous world. We can't do that. With all this different technology coming on board, people's different styles of working and everything else. So actually, your leadership of your company, or your country, or your organization is absolutely key in being a success, because you can become a non-tariff barrier again. So I just want you to think about your leadership signature. This is all about what style do you follow? What are you authoritative? Are you empathetic? Are you what else could you be? Controlling and whatever. So how do you operate? So just looking at a couple of these, if you look at Caesar, Putin, and perhaps Napoleon Bonaparte, they were all charismatic, or in the case of Putin is charismatic, but they're all authoritative. If you look at Boris Johnson or even Margaret Thatcher, what was their style? Now, this is important to understand your style, because when you're going out to another country or talking to a new client, they may have a different style. And what you want is this new company to sign a contract with you and open the doors. So that therefore you have to be aware of how they conduct their business. Now, if, and I mentioned this before about different countries having different things, if your potential customer wants a proper contract and you're very laissez-faire, is that going to work? Well, possibly. But I think that understanding the leadership signature of your potential partner is so important. There's lots and lots of words written about this. We've got a program all about leadership in international trade. Very happy to talk to anybody about that. You will appreciate this is such a short, truncated presentation that I can't do more on that. But it's fascinating. New styles of leadership in a new era of trade. So next slide, please, Ron. This is quite an interesting slide, and I urge you to have a look at this when you receive the slides. And there are some things on here from the World Economic Forum, which is an excellent resource, excellent. And I recognise their strategic what's it called? Transformation map, strategic intelligence, absolutely first class. It gives you that edge. It takes away some of that uncertainty, so that when you're going to that market, you're aware of all the non-tariff barriers. And this chart shows what do chief economists expect. And I've got two notes on it. Europe is tightening than loosening its non-tariff barriers. That's interesting. And that China is loosening access and standards. That is in direct change or opposite to the rest of the world. So China is loosening things, whereas Europe is tightening. Interesting to consider that when you're making your strategies for approaches to new markets. Next slide, please, John. So this could be for open discussion, but I'd like you to consider these things. Can there ever be an equivalence of standards? Well, that's a big question. Will the fifth industrial revolution enhance, alleviate, or confuse non-tariff barriers? Will global protection gradually be replaced by country measures? And finally, which I hope I've answered, how can a non-tariff barrier become a competitive advantage? Now, following this, I have provided a few slides, and you can just show them if you wouldn't mind, Ron. These are just some regulations, some references that you might want to go and have a look. So the next one from this, Ron, is on source material that I recommend. And then the last one, which is just an extension of that. I hope the time seems to have worked quite well. I hope that's given you an oversight of how I see non-tariff barriers, and I would be very welcome, very happy to answer any questions you may have, or if you wish to write to me post this event, I would be very happy to respond to you. Over back to you, Ron.
All right, thank you for that very informative presentation. Now it's time to open the floor for questions from our audience. Please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A box. And while we are waiting, I would like to ask our speaker to type in their email address in the chat box. So if they would like to reach out to you directly, they can just email you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And just few announcement. If anyone from the group is not yet a member of International Trade Council, please feel free to reach out to us and we can offer free membership for attending this session. Also, we'll be sending certificate of participation, so please expect that to arrive in your email in the next 24 to 48 hours. And lastly, this webinar is recorded and you can review it to our YouTube channel, International Trade Council. So yeah, we're open for questions now. I have one question here from our audience. I'll show it on the stage. Um, there is a rise in the use of AI and online translators such as Google Translate. What are your views on using this actual human language capabilities?
Okay. Oh, hello, Jackie. Yes, I know Jackie. It's good to see you on here. There is a rise of AI, and I personally have found it very useful. But the words of caution on all the AI sites are that you must check this because we are not infallible. Well, that sounds like a person, doesn't it? None of us are infallible. I use it as another check, so to speak. So whilst I make my own research on some of those things that I've given at the end of this presentation on references, I also check with the World Economic Forum, with the World Trade Organization, UN, all of those different organizations, and then perhaps ask AI. And I find that very, very useful because there's always things we don't know. What I think is dangerous is just putting something, asking an AI question and not verifying it, checking it, or making sure it's saying what you want it to say. I think there's a danger in being a Google groupie, and I think there could be a problem about being an AI groupie instead of having knowledge of a subject, an in-depth knowledge that you can question things. And I mentioned this earlier on. Knowing the right questions to ask is much more important than being able to repeat something back. What is the right question? Hopefully that's answered your query, Jackie. Ed.
Thank you for that, Linda.
Yeah.
So we have one more question here. Can AI simplify procedures and methods to save time in processing and allow more time to trade officers to analyze cases?
I go back to what I say, Ed. You need knowledge to understand what AI is saying. You can put in a query like you can with Google, and you can take that as that is the answer. I think that's dangerous. I think that is dangerous, and that we need to be aware that our knowledge is multifaceted, our research should be multifaceted, and that whilst you can put in place procedures or processes without a depth of knowledge, it becomes a nonsense. That's what I would say.
All right, thank you. All right, so any more questions? We're still open for questions here.
I'm quite interested, everybody, that the questions are around AI. I wouldn't say that that's a non-tariff barrier at all. I would think it's probably a help in research. I do think that. I think that it can give a structure to things, that the human interface, the human questioning, and how can AI interpret those cultural differences. I don't think you can. I think that anybody who's on this course, if they went out for a meal and you met somebody from another culture sat next to you in the theatre or in the pub or in a restaurant, you would learn more about that person than you would by putting in a question into AI. Oh gosh, another
Uh,
one.
yeah. Yes, it's from Ed as well. How can AI be dangerous in international trade?
By you not understanding the questions you've asked it. Hopefully that makes sense. If you don't
All
ask the
right,
right questions, you won't get the right answer.
correct. I agree. So, any more questions?
I'd like to ask a question of everybody who is on the course,
Oh,
on this presentation right now. Has anybody come across a non-tariff barrier that they cannot overcome?
all right. So, everyone can participate by typing in your questions here. I mean, your answers here in the chat box. So, Linda can elaborate more and give us feedback about your answers.
They've all gone to sleep, Ron. Is it all AI, do you think, apart from my friend Jackie?
Um, yeah, I don't see any more questions here.
No. Well, that's a shame, because this was an ideal opportunity, and whatever. If I can leave people with something, I'd
Mhm.
like to express that they should know about the regulations. They should be aware of what's coming through, and they should know that if they're going to a new country, there could be new regulations. Knowledge is key. Second thing is to do your market research about the type of people you will meet and the cultural needs of that country. Understand who you are and what sort of person you want to deal with, and that actually, leave that person or those people or those companies wanting more because you understand what it is that is important to them. You can only do that by doing your research, whether some of that be on AI, but there is no substitute for going out, looking and seeing what's happening in the market. Is very much Gemba, which is in the lean manufacturing directory. And I think we need to be aware, cognizant of what's going on, and actually looking to the future and about your strategic growth that becomes sustainable because you have been intelligent about it.
Yes, Alinda, I don't know if this answer from Mohit is from your question. He said, I'd say subsidies provided by the government doesn't make our products competitive. So, not sure if you would like to
Pardon,
comment about that.
can you repeat that, please, Ron?
So it's on the chat box right now. He said that subsidies provided by the government doesn't make our products competitive.
No, I would agree. I don't think they do. I think that sometimes the people who are bringing in the subsidies or the sanctions don't understand international trade. There's a great book out now that I've just bought, Why Politicians Lie About International Trade, something like that. And I don't think they do. I was at a World Trade Organization event in Geneva, and I was talking to some officials from that country, a different country that I won't mention at this time. And I said, when you're putting in sanctions or subsidies for your companies, do you speak to the companies that will be affected by such things? And they said no. And I was astounded. I was astounded. So I would say, Mohit, and I think you and I might have spoken before, that actually it goes back to people asking the right questions, and you being aware of the implications of what has been done or not done. I'm with you.
All right, we have one question here. What could be your suggestion for removing cultural incompatibility?
Being open-minded, doing your research, going out and experiencing that country if you can. If not, find somebody perhaps already on your staff. So many companies don't ask, does anybody speak another language? Has anybody lived in another country? That gives them a competitive advantage. Again, this is knowledge thing. So how do we remove the incompatibility? That's only about education, knowledge, and going back to leadership signatures, about being inclusive. And I think this won't be done in the next 5, 10, 15 years because there is so much incompatibility out there, which is such a shame, Dr. Anjani. Um, all we can do is spread the word. And my probably parting statement today is that international trade stops people shooting each other. That is the single most important thing, because if you're trading with somebody, you tend not to want to fight them. And I think as an arbiter for world peace, international trade has to show the way for this cultural incompatibility and dealing with that.
All right, thank you. Um, I don't see any more questions here. Okay, you're welcome, Dr. Anjani. So, all right. If there's no more questions, I think we can conclude the session for today. I would like to give the floor to our again to our speaker for parting words. Any final words before we end the session?
Um, for me, it's been a great pleasure, and I thank you to the ITC for giving me the opportunity, especially for your management of this, Ron. That's been a great pleasure, and
You're
thank you,
welcome.
even with some of the challenges we had earlier on. I
Yes.
would like for everybody just to take something, if you only take one little nugget from what I've spoken about today, about improving your chances, because I think that, again, it goes back to trade. If we are shooting, if we are trading, we are not shooting other nations. And I think that is so important. I think that there is a huge amount of work to be done with the incompatibility. I think there's a huge amount of work to be done with gender inequality per se. And there was an interesting piece from the WTO that actually worked out that commodity codes based around women typical industries are have higher tariffs than those that men are involved in. So I think that there's a whole shed load of stuff there. I would ask each and every one of you to think about speaking out about these inequalities. I think that going to the public forum at the WTO is a good move for all of you. Anybody can go. It's in Geneva in September, October every year. And I think we need to make our voices heard, and we need to have our governments understand the implications of what we do, and the implications of what they do and how that affects us. So hopefully that's not too moralistic, but that's the way that I feel.
All right. All right, thank you so much. On behalf of International Trade Council, I would like to express our appreciation to our speaker Ms. Linda Middleton Jones, for speaking for today's educational session. That is very informative. And also thank you for all the attendees for today's educational session. And we look forward seeing you again in our future webinars. We hope you now have a clear understanding of the technical and political regulations, sanitary measure, customs procedure, and intellectual property rights that can impact international trade. As we move forward, we encourage you to apply these insights to overcome these challenges and enhance your global business operation. So we appreciate your participation and looking forward to seeing you again to our future events. Have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.